Have you ever wondered why a rice farmer in Vietnam, a factory worker in Germany, and an oil baron in Saudi Arabia all need to hold US dollars? It's not because American products are superior. The world isn't buying our cars or our electronics anymore. It's not simply because we have the biggest military. The British Empire had the most powerful navy for 2 centuries, and the pound sterling still lost its throne. The real reason the dollar dominates the planet has nothing to do with free markets or economic superiority. It has everything to do with two secret deals made decades apart. One was negotiated in a mountain resort while World War II bombs were still falling on Europe. The other was sealed in the desert with a medieval monarchy that still beheads people for witchcraft. Together, these two deals built a system that allows America to print paper money and exchange it for the real wealth of the entire world. And they never taught you about either one in school. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the dollar's throne was engineered, who built it, who benefits from it, and why the entire system is now cracking at the foundation. What happens next will determine whether your savings are worth anything at all. To understand how radical the dollar's rise truly was, you have to understand the world that existed before it. For nearly 2 centuries, the British pound sterling ruled global finance. It was the currency of the world's largest empire, backed by gold reserves, enforced by the Royal Navy, and accepted in every port from Shanghai to Buenos Aires. If you wanted to buy cotton from Egypt or tea from India or rubber from Malaysia, you paid in pounds. The pound wasn't dominant because Britain asked nicely. It was dominant because Britain controlled the trade routes, the insurance markets, the banking networks, and the military force to back it all up. London was the center of global finance. Then came World War I. The Great War didn't just kill millions of young men in the trenches. It killed the old monetary order. Britain, France, and Germany all suspended the gold standard to print money for shells and soldiers. By 1918, European economies were drowning in debt and their currencies were bleeding credibility. The pound limped on for another 2 decades, but it was a zombie currency. The 1930s delivered the killing blow: competitive devaluations, beggar-thy-neighbor trade wars, bank runs, and currency collapses spread like a financial plague. Nations abandoned gold one by one, printing money to fund welfare and rearmament. This chaos contributed directly to the rise of fascism and the Second World War. By 1944, the old monetary order was dead. Someone had to build a new one, and the architects had a very specific plan. It wasn't about global stability. It was about American dominance. July 1944. The war in Europe had just turned decisively. D-Day had happened only weeks before. American and British forces were fighting through Normandy while Soviet armies pushed toward Berlin. But even as the bullets were still flying, 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at a grand resort hotel in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, the Mount Washington Hotel at Bretton Woods. Picture the scene: wood-paneled conference rooms thick with cigarette smoke, diplomats and economists arguing late into the night over decimal points that would determine the fate of nations, waiters serving cocktails while the future of global finance was carved up like a Christmas turkey. Two men dominated these proceedings: John Maynard Keynes, the brilliant British economist, perhaps the most famous economic mind of the 20th century, and Harry Dexter White, an official from the U.S. Treasury. Keynes proposed a neutral international currency called the Bancor. No single nation would control it. It would be managed by an international institution for the benefit of all. It was elegant, it was fair, it was completely irrelevant. White wanted the dollar to rule, and White had leverage. By 1944, the United States held roughly 2/3 of all monetary gold in the world, over 20,000 metric tons of the stuff, stacked in the vaults of Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Europe was bombed out. Britain was bankrupt, surviving on American loans. The only country with factories running and gold flowing in was America. Keynes could talk about fairness all he wanted. White had the gold. And he who has the gold makes the rules. White outmaneuvered Keynes at every turn. When Keynes proposed the Bancor, White buried it in committee. When Britain asked for favorable terms, White reminded them who was paying for the war. The final agreement: the dollar would be pegged to gold at exactly $35 per ounce. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar at fixed rates. Any foreign government could exchange dollars for American gold at that rate. America gave its word. The dollar was now as good as gold. Actually better, because dollars paid interest and were easier to transport. The French economist Jacques Rueff called this the exorbitant privilege. America could print dollars to buy real goods from other countries, and those countries would hold the paper as reserves rather than demanding gold. It was like having a credit card where your creditors never send you a bill. Here's a dark footnote. Harry Dexter White was later accused of being a Soviet spy. FBI files and Soviet archives suggest he passed information to Moscow. The man who handed global finance to America may have been working for the communists. The system had one fatal flaw. It only worked as long as America didn't abuse the printing press. Spoiler, they abused it immediately. For 20 years, the Bretton Woods system worked on the surface. The global economy boomed, trade expanded, currencies were stable. But America was spending far more than it collected. The Marshall Plan sent billions to rebuild. Europe, partly to stop communism, partly to create customers for American exports. The Korean War burned through treasure unpaid by taxes. Military bases sprouted in over 100 countries. Each one cost money. Then came Lyndon Johnson's mad dream of guns and butter. The Vietnam War consumed over $500 billion in today's money, poured into the jungles of Southeast Asia with no end in sight. Simultaneously, the Great Society launched Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty. Johnson refused to raise taxes. That would force Americans to choose between the war and the welfare state. So the Federal Reserve printed money. Dollars flooded into foreign central banks like a river breaking its banks. A dangerous imbalance emerged. More dollars existed than gold to back them. At $35 per ounce, America owed more gold than Fort Knox contained. The system was becoming a Ponzi scheme running out of new money. Foreign governments noticed. Their vaults filled with paper while American vaults emptied. Of gold, one man decided to call the bluff. Charles de Gaulle was the towering president of France, a war hero who led the Free French Resistance, a proud nationalist who resented American dominance. De Gaulle saw through the scheme with clarity. America was exporting inflation to the world. Every printed dollar diluted the value of dollars held abroad. It was theft without prosecution. In February 1965, de Gaulle held a press conference that shocked the financial establishment. Standing before cameras with the bearing of a man who had stared down Hitler, he announced France would systematically exchange dollars for gold, exercising the right America had promised at Bretton Woods. He declared that gold alone could serve as the true foundation of currency. He was calling America a liar in diplomatic terms. De Gaulle wasn't just making speeches. France shipped plane loads of dollars to New York demanding gold bars. French naval vessels carried American bullion across the Atlantic to Paris. It was financial warfare disguised as monetary policy. Other nations followed: Britain, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, Netherlands. The trickle became a flood, a slow-motion bank run on Fort Knox. The numbers tell the hemorrhage. In 1949, America held 21,000 metric tons of gold, roughly 70% of the world's monetary supply. By 1960, down to 15,000. By 1965, 12,000. By 1968, barely 9,000. At this rate, the vaults would be empty within years. The promise that any foreign bank could exchange $35 for an ounce of gold was becoming physically impossible. In March 1968, the London gold pool collapsed after selling 400 tons in a single day trying to hold the price. The system was dying. Everyone knew it. The only question was how America would handle the default. Summer 1971. Britain requested to convert $3 billion into gold. The math was catastrophic. America had roughly $10 billion in gold left at the official price. Its foreign liabilities exceeded $70 billion. If Britain was paid and others followed, the vault would be empty in days. Nixon summoned advisors to Camp David for secret emergency meetings. Treasury Secretary John Connally, a brash Texan, pushed the radical option. When someone raised concerns about foreign reactions, Connally delivered a line that echoed through history. The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. The decision was made. Close the gold window, default on Bretton Woods. Sunday night, August 15, 1971. Nixon preempted the television Western bonanza to address 90 million Americans. In an 18-minute speech, he announced the temporary suspension of dollar convertibility into gold. Temporary. That was the word he used? He blamed speculators, framed it as defending American workers against unfair competition. Every word was a lie. The temporary suspension has lasted over 50 years. The gold window never reopened. America looked the entire world in the eye and said, we are not paying our debts. This was the largest default in human history, but they called it policy, not bankruptcy. Gold, freed from its $35 cage, climbed relentlessly. By 1980, it hit $850 per ounce, a 2,300% increase that revealed how badly the dollar had been debased while everyone pretended the system worked. But now America had a problem. The dollar had no anchor, pure paper backed by nothing but faith. Faith alone cannot run a global empire. If nations no longer needed dollars to redeem gold, why hold them? The exorbitant privilege was in danger. They needed a new scheme. Enter Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, perhaps the most Machiavellian foreign policy mind America ever produced. The 1973 OPEC embargo devastated America. Gas lines stretched around blocks, rationing imposed, oil prices quadrupled overnight. Kissinger saw opportunity inside chaos. In 1974, he traveled to Saudi Arabia for secret negotiations with King Faisal. The deal was never officially published, but has been confirmed by participants over decades. Saudi Arabia agreed to price all oil exports exclusively in dollars. Every barrel sold to any country would be denominated in American currency. Saudi Arabia would invest surplus petrodollars in U.S. Treasury bonds. The billions flowing into Saudi coffers would flow right back as loans to the U.S. government. In exchange, America guaranteed military security for the House of Saud, American weapons, American training, American protection against any enemy. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, and it was a stroke of evil genius. Think about what this meant. Oil is the lifeblood of industrial civilization. Every factory that makes your products runs on petroleum. Every truck that ships your goods burns diesel. Every airplane, every ship, every tractor, every power plant needs oil or its derivatives to function. Every country on earth that wanted to participate in the modern economy needed petroleum. And now, to buy oil, they needed dollars. First, this created a permanent artificial demand for the dollar that replaced the gold anchor with something even better from America's perspective. Japan had to export cars to America to earn dollars to buy Saudi oil. Germany had to export machinery. China had to export everything. Every nation on earth was now forced to trade real goods and real labor for American paper just to keep their lights on and their engines running. The dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was backed by something the whole world needed even more desperately, energy itself. Gold had been replaced by oil as the anchor, but there was a crucial difference. Gold sits in a vault. Once you have it forever. Oil gets burned. You always need more. The demand for dollars would be permanent and growing as long as the world ran on petroleum. The Saudis were trading finite, irreplaceable resources for paper promises from a country that had just proven it would break promises whenever convenient. And they stored that paper right back in the vaults of their protector, buying U.S. Treasury bonds that funded American deficits. Other OPEC nations followed Saudi Arabia's lead. The petrodollar became the global standard. America could keep printing, keep running deficits, keep consuming more than it produced. And the world had no choice but to accept the paper because they needed it to buy energy. America exports dollars. The world exports real goods and real labor. We get cars and electronics and oil. They get paper promises that lose value every year. This is why the American standard of living stayed high, even as manufacturing collapsed. This is how we funded military bases in over 100 countries. This is how we fought wars costing trillions without raising taxes, all paid for by the world's willingness to hold depreciating dollars. And those who tried to break free? Saddam Hussein announced Iraq would sell oil in euros in November 2000. In March 2003, the United States invaded. Saddam ended up in a hole, then at the end of a rope. Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African dinar in 2011. NATO bombed Libya. He was dragged through streets and killed by a mob. Coincidence? The facts speak for themselves. If you're starting to see why the dollar isn't backed by gold anymore, it's backed by bombs, hit that like button right now. This isn't about gaming some algorithm. It's about breaking through the wall of silence around deals that were never supposed to be public. Every like pushes this in front of someone who still thinks America's wars are about democracy. You can help spread what they buried. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 98% of its purchasing power. A dollar then bought what costs nearly $8 today. National debt, $400 billion in 1971, over $36 trillion today, a 90-fold increase that can never be repaid through taxation. It can only be inflated away, which means they will keep stealing your purchasing power until there's nothing left to steal. But here's what the textbooks never explain. The theft doesn't hit everyone equally. There are winners and losers in this system, and the division is not random. The winners are those who get the new money first: banks, government contractors, asset owners, Wall Street. When the Federal Reserve creates trillions of dollars, it doesn't mail checks to every citizen. It injects the money into the financial system. The banks and hedge funds and private equity firms get it first. They use it to buy assets, stocks, real estate, companies before prices adjust. By the time the new money trickles down to ordinary workers in the form of wages, prices have already risen. You feel the inflation long before you see any benefit. This is the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century economist who first described it. Whoever touches the fresh money first wins. Whoever gets it last, the workers, the savers, the people on fixed incomes, they get robbed. This is why wages have stagnated in real terms for 50 years, while stock markets have exploded. This is why your grandparents thrived on one income, while you struggle on two. This is why housing is unaffordable. This is why the middle class has been hollowed out, not by accident, by design. The secret deals of 1944 and 1974 are still extracting wealth from your paycheck every single day, but the petrodollar system that has ruled for 50 years is now under attack from multiple directions. China is buying oil from Saudi Arabia in yuan. Russia demands rubles for its gas exports to Europe. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a growing list of others are building alternative payment systems specifically designed to bypass the dollar. These countries have studied history. They watched what Nixon did in 1971 when America broke its promise to the world. They watched what happened to Iraq and Libya when those countries tried to sell oil in other currencies. They saw what happened in 2022 when America froze Russia's dollar reserves after the Ukraine invasion. $300 billion seized with the click of a mouse. That sent a message to every nation on earth. Your dollars belong to you only as long as Washington approves of your behavior. Cross America, and your reserves can be confiscated at will. Why would any rational country keep its wealth in a currency that can be weaponized against them? De-dollarization is accelerating, not because other currencies are better, but because nobody wants to be the last one holding the bag when the music stops. The percentage of global reserves held in dollars has been declining for years. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. They're not buying gold because they love shiny metal. They're buying it because gold cannot be frozen by sanctions. Gold cannot be printed by the Federal Reserve. Gold cannot be devalued by congressional deficit spending. They're preparing for the post-dollar world. And here's the development that should terrify anyone paying attention. Saudi Arabia is now openly discussing accepting other currencies for oil. The kingdom that has been the cornerstone of the petrodollar system for 50 years is hedging its bets. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets with Chinese leaders, with Russian officials, with anyone offering alternatives to total dependence on Washington. The deal Kissinger made in 1974 is unraveling in real time. The exorbitant privilege is ending, not with a dramatic announcement like Nixon's Sunday night speech, but with a slow, grinding shift as the world builds exits from the dollar prison. When the world stops needing dollars to buy oil, when central banks stop holding dollars as reserves, America will face a reality it hasn't experienced since before World War II. We will have to pay for our imports with real goods instead of printed paper. We will have to live within our means instead of borrowing from the future. This means a massive decline in the American standard of living. The same thing that happened to Britain when the pound lost its reserve currency status. The British adjustment that turned a proud empire into a second-tier economy within a generation. The lesson of history is clear. Governments always default on their promises eventually. The 1944 Bretton Woods promise lasted 27 years before Nixon broke it. The petrodollar system has now lasted 50 years, and the cracks are spreading everywhere. The only protection is to own assets that cannot be printed. Gold, which has preserved purchasing power for 5,000 years. Land, which produces real value and cannot be debased by a keystroke. Productive businesses that generate goods and services people actually need. These secret deals built a system that extracted wealth from the entire world and funneled it to a small elite, understanding that history is the first step to protecting yourself from the collapse that's already beginning. If you made it this far, you understand more about global finance than most economics professors. I'm not exaggerating. They teach the dollar's dominance like it's a natural phenomenon. They don't mention the smoke-filled rooms at Bretton Woods. They don't explain Kissinger's desert deal. They don't discuss why countries that tried to leave the system ended up invaded or destroyed. So here's what I want from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, when did you first realize the dollar system was rigged? Was it when you learned Nixon's temporary suspension has lasted 50 years? Was it when you saw what happened to countries that tried to sell oil in other currencies? Was it when you watched your rent double while they told you inflation was transitory? Tell me your moment. And if you want more of the history they kept out of the textbooks, subscribe. This channel exists to expose what the financial establishment spent decades burying. They kept this out of textbooks because they didn't want you to understand. Now you do. The men who made these deals are dead now, but their machine keeps running. Every time you fill your gas tank, every time prices rise, every time you work harder to stay in place, you're paying for promises made and broken before you were born. The dollar's throne was built on secret deals, and secret deals, once exposed, rarely survive the sunlight.